Okay, so as we start our Earth Science unit, first thing we're going to start with studying is Earth's surface, the land, the rocks. So what happens as the land changes? So there's three processes that we're going to focus on. So the first one is weathering. Weathering is the breakdown of rocks into smaller pieces by natural causes. Okay, so weathering is the breakdown of rocks into smaller pieces by natural causes. Remember, if you forget how to spell pieces, it's I before E except after C. So in this case, it's P-I-E-C-E-S. All right, so there's two different types of weathering. All right, pieces of weathered rocks are called sediments. Feel free to color in your letters and make your notes a little bit more fun. Alright, so first we're going to talk about physical weathering. Physical weathering. So when we think of physical, I wonder what the first thing that comes to mind is. Okay, so physical is the breakdown of rocks. The breakdown of rocks into smaller pieces. Remember I before E except after C. Okay, so I'm going to put a slash W slash O for without changing their chemical composition. Okay, so physical weathering is going to be more of you're doing it with more of a process. So notice here it has the hammer. Okay, the hammer would be breaking something into pieces, but whatever it started out as, it's still that. So if you take limestone and you bust it up into pieces, it's still limestone. It's just in smaller pieces. So what are some examples of physical weathering? So we have something that's called abrasion. All right, we have biological. Bio means life. Okay, plants and animals. So sometimes roots can grow into rocks or into concrete, if you want to look at it that way. All right, and they're breaking them into smaller pieces. All right, we have ice wedging. So water gets in and then it freezes and the rock expands. Or we have something that's called freeze-thaw. So that process, the water goes in, and when it reaches a certain temperature, it becomes a solid, so then it starts to expand and fill up the space, and then sometimes the rock will break. Okay, exfoliation, and sometimes heat. Okay, those are all things that kind of help with physical weathering. Okay, so now let's look at chemical weathering. Alright, so if physical does not change the chemical composition, then chemical weathering has to change it, right? Because it's called chemical weathering. So that means that it would change what it actually is. So if you have limestone and you break it up into pieces, it's still limestone. So if you have limestone and you do something to it and it's no longer limestone, okay, then you just change its composition. Alright, so it's the breakdown of rock by naturally, a lot of this is naturally, this is not human done, okay, human action. Naturally occurring chemicals. So it doesn't have to be like the vinegar we use in our experiments, okay? This would be stuff that is in nature, but it breaks the rock down. So let's look at some examples. What are some examples of chemical weathering? So there's different rocks that get broken up into a solution. All right, there's this process called hydrolysis, oxidation, and carbonation. Not necessarily like the carbonation in your soda, okay? Alright, so let's look at 3 factors that influence how a rock will actually go through that weathering process. So we're going to look at 3 different things that affect the weathering process. Okay? So we have remember, you can make your notes fun, coloring in all the different spots. Alright, so let's look at the first thing, surface area. How much surface is there of the rock? Okay. The climate. Climate has to do with temperature and weather conditions. Alright, so I'm going to put a little sun here to make you hopefully think of temperature. Alright, maybe I'll do some clouds. Alright. So climate also affects how a rock will be weathered into pieces. Alright, and the type of rock. And we will talk about all the different types of rock. Alright, so let's look at this question. The next question talks about how does weathering relate to the rock cycle. Okay, so weathering creates sediment. Remember, sediments are the weathered rocks, pieces of weathered rocks. So create sediment, which are deposited and settle to become sedimentary rock. Which is a type of rock that goes through the process in the rock cycle. How does weathering impact people? Okay, well, it does damage. My pen is running out. Oh no. Okay, so it does damage to roads, which that's what potholes. Okay, that's what creates potholes, breaking things into smaller pieces. Remember, you had one big road and now you have pieces missing. And it affects buildings because buildings are made up of certain rocks. Alright, so stay tuned for the next video, and it's going to talk about erosion.